Hi everybody. I see some names in the participant list that have already seen me today. So welcome back to all of these, and welcome, just welcome to the other ones, to this third masterclass of games made in Europe. That is our speaker today is Soren Lass on video game financing. For those who haven't been at the previous masterclasses, the way you can ask questions is through the Q&A tool on Zoom. So ask any question there. There will be a specific time at the end where Soren will be able to take some time to answer them. Just it's the easiest way for us. And apart from that, I think that's pretty much it. So Soren, floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Yeah, the topic today is financing for game developers, opportunities and risks. So this is what we're going to talk about in the next 2 hours. Here's a little bit about my background, why I'm doing this talk today. I work as a consultant in the games industry. I've been in the games industry for around 20 years. And in the bar below, you see a few of my clients. I work a lot for investors that invest in games. I work for publishers, but I also work a lot for studios and help them raise money. So done that over the last 5 years, and a lot of the stuff today is about the experiences I've been doing there. I've been pitching a lot, raising a lot of money for different studios, primarily from Denmark and Germany. I'm based in Hamburg. But I have clients also in other countries. About my background, before I was a consultant, I wanted to talk a little bit about the games I've been working on, because I know that a lot of you people probably are game developers. So a little bit about what I've been doing. I originally started in the games industry at Ubisoft in Copenhagen, where I was part of the team that set up the office there. So a very important game to me back then was Rayman 2, which was the biggest title that Rayman had there at the time. At that time, Ubisoft was still quite a small publisher in Europe, and we were taking care of the Nordic market from Copenhagen. A lot of things changed then with Splinter Cell, which was, I would say, the first real AAA we had. Before that, my job in marketing was a lot to promote games, sell games to PR, to possible partners, and I had to phone a lot of people all the time. And with Splinter Cell, then suddenly people started to call me. That was a huge difference. And then Ubisoft became, of course, a huge company. I also progressed, and I moved from Copenhagen to Montreal in Quebec, Canada. Because I had been working in distribution marketing for a long time, and was doing a lot of the sales things for the games, but always wanted to work closer with the development side. Whenever we visited the studios in Paris, I don't know, I could really feel that I like that side of the whole process there. So Ubisoft had some positions where they needed people like me who had experience in marketing to work together with the producers and creative directors to define the concepts, the directions of the game. So I worked in the editorial marketing there for 4 years, and the main titles there, I think I spent a year on Rainbow Six Vegas at the time, and I worked a lot on licensed games like Star Wars Lethal Alliance, Avatar, and other titles. But of course, also worked with the team on some of the other titles that came out, Assassin's Creed and Far Cry and things like that. And then around 10 years ago, I moved back to Europe for private reasons, and I started working for a publisher here in Germany. And I think this is the relevant part for what I'm talking about today. So I was basically a scout, a business developer, as you call it. So I was in the market and looking a lot for games. And I think the most important game to me, the one I'm most proud of, is Awesome Notes, which is from a Dutch studio, and Ronimo Games, and actually now I think one of the biggest studios in the Netherlands, and that game really defined them. And yeah, basically I found that game. I was involved in the whole process. But of course, there were so many other games and studios that I worked with, also from France at the time. So I learned a lot about, you know, the challenges that developers are facing with funding their games from the publisher side. And then I added Ad Infinitum, which is from a Berlin studio, and this is from the times basically the last years, because as I told you, a lot of the things I'm doing is connecting you know, studios to publishers. And Ad Infinitum was a game, a small team from Berlin I worked with, and we ended up getting a publishing deal with Nacon. So it's one of Nacon's key titles this year. So I'm also seeing a lot from that side, trying to sell games, trying to get a deal, trying to raise the money, and how to combine that with other means. So yeah, I think that's this about my background. The topic today, of course, is all about financing, and here are two quotes about the importance or non-importance of money. I don't agree that it's all about the money, but a lot is about the money. And I saw that when I was at Ubisoft, even though Ubisoft is a huge company, you know, sometimes you could even feel it being you know, an employee. One example is I had just moved to Canada with my family and just started on my new job there. And then suddenly EA acquired 20% of Ubisoft, and there were rumors in the company that you know, they might take over the whole studio, and all the marketing people would get kicked out. Luckily, that didn't happen, but already there in such a big ship, I could feel the you know, the effect of the business. And of course, I see that a lot today as well. I mean, a lot of the studios I've been working with have been going through good times, but also hard times. You know, some have signed some good deals, and a few years later, they run into problems. And so my main conclusion is that it's very important to care about money. You can have a very creative vision, but you need to consider the economic side of things as well. And there are so many opportunities out there. So I'm trying to give a perspective of, and trying to get you to really look broader, because it's today it's not that there's, like there was in the old day, this one publisher that comes with a big bag of money and then you're done. For mostly you have to build your financing for your projects and companies. And what I've seen is that some of the companies that have been very successful over a long time are the ones that have been proactively out in the market and looking for these opportunities, in addition to being very creative. So so maybe I can get you motivated with this talk today to look at those opportunities out there and seek them and nurture them while you're working on your games. So talking about money, the good news is we're in the gaming market, and the gaming market is a very attractive place for raising money right now. We've seen a huge increase in the market over the last few years during the pandemic, and also that's seen on the investment side. So I think it's never been easier to raise money for studios than it was a few years ago. The last year has been, or also the beginning of this year has shown a little bit of a more difficult time than last year and the year before. There's been some, you know, the interest rates have come up. There's less money in venture capital than there used to be. You've seen with some of the big tech companies out there, also some of them have been, you know, downsizing, like Microsoft, Google. So people are a bit more careful, but still, compared to 3-4 years ago, there's lots of opportunities out there. And this growth is expected to grow. I mean, on average, I have some projections from a VC company here, but the different, you know, marketing and forecasts companies all still project growth, of course, within different sectors. of the gaming industry, but in generally there's a good outlook. But of course you need to be careful where you're going and where you're in. So what are the drivers behind that? Of course, console, we're taking off a bit slow, the new generation, but the install bases are really expected to grow in the next few years on PS5 and Xbox. There's new hardware. New hardware is always driving excitement in the industry. So, you know, the Steam Deck, the new VR platforms that have been announced, like PlayStation 2 VR, but also there's more coming to the end of the year, are bringing dynamic into the market. The whole metaverse, transmedia, cross-media things open up for a lot of opportunities. So in generally, the opportunities for raising money are good, even though they're not as good as they have been maybe you know, during the pandemic. So you need to be aware of that. It takes more to get the money now. Hopefully I can help a little bit with showing you about that. And in general, I mean, there is pressure on, there's a big demand for developers right now due to the pandemic home office working. Remote working has been a popular model and is accepted everywhere now. So there's a huge global competition for talent, and a lot of companies, developers I talk to, mention this also as an issue for them and a challenge. But you need to raise money for that, of course. So this is a little bit how the market is looking right now. I did a survey for the ministry in Germany that's administrating the German funds, or was administrating it 2 years ago. It's changed now, and we did a survey among European studios where they find their money, and we interviewed a couple of studios from Germany, from France, from Scandinavia, and we saw that, you know, that it's more or less the same sources that everybody is using, and this is what I will cover today, and I will give an overview over them and also talk about the risks and the opportunities associated with them. So during the startup phase, I mean, that's normally when you come out of university and you just set up or however you start your company. A lot of investment is actually coming from your own time. You know, you've probably worked on a prototype or something like that, and have invested a lot of your spare time into this. Then a lot of companies start by doing work for hire, which can be supporting larger studios with delivering assets, doing programming work. Then regional support, because regional support is normally smaller than the national support you can get, is a big source of finance too as well. Private money and friends, money from friends and family, and also business angels that can in banks and loans, not on a high scale, but most of the companies we talk to also, of course, talk with their banks and had some credits when they started. I will get more into banking funding later on. Then in the growth phase or consolidation, that's when you probably, you know, you finish the prototype with help of some regional support and your own money, maybe your own time you've invested. Then other sources come into place. You know, you maybe might be able to get a deal with a publisher which can co-produce your game or publish it. Work for hire can still be an important source for you. Maybe you set up several teams. Maybe work for hire can help you to bridge between some two projects, and suddenly also regional and federal support together can be interesting because you might need larger budgets. Then venture capitalists are also more and more used more in the growth phase, even though some also invest in the seed phase. But you need some certain qualifications for being attractive there already. And then royalties, of course, if you have a successful game that's out there and it brings enough money so that you can invest in the next one, is also something that's often used. So this is really I would say what most gaming studios, 90% of the studios are using here. And let's look closer at some of them. But before that, maybe here a mention of you know, when the additional money is needed, when the finance is really needed. And there's certain critical stages we saw, again, interviews I've been doing with studios and also old experience. So normally, you know, if you're in a conception phase, this is with Danish kroners, by the way. So you have to divide by 7 to make it to euros. If you're in the conception prototype phase, normally you can get along quite well, but then you need to wrap up for your production. And that's mostly when companies are out and pitching, either for investors or for other publishers, because you know, there's a big difference between financing a prototype and then going into full production. So so this is one of the critical situations which some startup companies maybe never get across, or some of them continue to do work for hire where they have this done prototype and which might come to market later or never happens. But this is, I would call, the first critical stage. Of course, then while you're in production, very often everything is fine because you've secured the finance, but there can be problems there as well, and I've seen that very often. That can, for instance, be if you've agreed on a budget with a publisher, or you received some investments from some investors, and suddenly, you know, the project gets delayed. It might be the first project, might also be a second or third, but you know, game productions are difficult to perfectly plan. So suddenly, you know, you're running out of budget and need more finance. That's a challenge I've seen with quite a few studios. Another issue, of course, is there that you need another project once the project is closed. And I cannot remind often enough that you know, when you've signed your first deal or you've just signed a big deal, it's the best time to raise money for your next deal. So a lot of studios stop speaking with publishers when they've secured the finance. But a general rule is, and that's what also different people told me in the survey, is it's difficult to get money when you need it. It's always good to look for money when you don't need it. And if you're in a position that you've just signed a deal with a publisher and you can speak with other publishers and you're not in a hurry, that makes things easier. Also with your bank, it's difficult to ask for a credit in the bank when you don't have any more money in your account. So, but you need, of course, money for your next project, and you need to create a prototype somehow. And getting money for that, of course, is also then challenging again, because you need to manage that during your production process. For free-to-play games, of course, it's the financing of the live team then later. So getting from prototype to production is very challenging. And then, of course, you know, getting to the next project is also a very tricky situation for most studios. And of course, if you rely on royalties on a game coming out and you plan to invest that into the next game, it's also something, because if the game does not perform as you were expecting, which very often is the case, that can also lead into problems. So my recommendations, and I think that's shared with all other talks that I see, is never trust that you will have royalties coming in that can finance your next game. You need to have alternatives, because anything can happen. But I'm sure you know about that. Here's a few companies. I just want to explain how they started, how they funded. Dedelic Entertainment, which was here in Hamburg, a developer publisher that was sold last year to Nacon for, I think, around 50 million euros. They started off with some private money. They were very good at financing their games, like around 10 years ago, when they were founded, with minimum guarantees they got from publishers, with public funding, and eventually also got an investment from a German media company called Bastei Lübbe. Then there's InnoGames, which is also here from Hamburg, a big company that makes over 100 million euros a year now, that is mostly owned by Modern Times Group right now. Started off as a browser game company, as with basically 4 guys working on a game. They never needed any cash, because they they started to make money when the browser game market really was taking off, and grew from that, but with the help from private investment after they had a good business case, and became one of the most successful gaming companies in Germany. Then there's Rockfish Games, which is a developer that's like I would call them a one IP company, even though they might be working on some other things. but they're known for their game, for their brand Everspace. Everspace 2 just launched very successfully. And they basically started, they were very experienced, came out of another company as well. But they started based on a publishing deal and also some private investment, and have been very good at raising money also via Kickstarter campaigns, and are now living with a mix of royalties and other alternative financing sources. And then here's a studio from Hamburg, also an indie studio called Moon Eye. They came out of the German university here in Hamburg, and it was basically their master project. They were supporting with some public money, and did some Kickstarter campaign, self-published this game, and became very, very successful with this. So what I just want to show is there's different paths to becoming a successful company, and each studio is different. So you need to find your own way. So let's now look at the first source, which is your own time, the efforts that you spend in that you put in and invest into your game. And I have an example here from Denmark, which is Beta-Dwarf. Beta-Dwarf is also a very successful company, one of the biggest studios in Denmark right now, and have investments from London venture partners, game makers, and other funds. And they basically started coming out of university, and they wanted to do this game Force that they all dreamed about. So because they didn't have money to rent some expensive locations, they basically took a spare room in the university and stayed there for several months, and were sleeping there. You can read the whole story on this website. And but eventually got kicked out, and then they moved to a very remote location in Denmark, where the rates were the cheapest, and stayed there, and and got so far. So they had a prototype running, and then went on to make a Kickstarter campaign. And I think this example shows very much the dedication that and the basically bringing in your own blood and sweat and tears, probably also, how that brings a lot of starts of a lot of gaming companies. So this model, of course, has both advantages and disadvantages. Of course, the advantage is you have a lot of creative freedom. You have independence. You can really create what you want to do. It might also be a lifestyle that you like, and of course you will have a very strong potential commercial upside if things go well. On the other side, it's hard. It's very hard. You need to live on quite a low salary for quite a long time, and I would say the lifestyle is maybe not the right thing for everyone. So so you need to consider that, and eventually doing it that way might need, and in most cases, you need to find additional funding later on, but it can get you a long way. What I want to emphasize here is that when I'm out with developers, a lot of companies very often forget that they have invested so much time and effort into their prototype, and don't quantify that as a value. So if a publisher asks you, how much have you already invested in the game? Normally, quite a lot of companies, they mention just the money they got from grants or what they've invested in cash in the company. But having 20 people work, or even 5 people for 2-3 years on a prototype is actually quite a lot of money. And I can really just recommend to put a number on that and use this as a hard investment into your project, because it will allow you to negotiate better terms with the publishers. Another opportunity, of course, is crowdfunding. Crowdfunding, as I showed with Beta-Dwarf, was a very successful few years ago, and it still is a very good tool to do it. But it's not as easy to get the money as it used to be. I have here a list of German very successful Kickstarter campaigns. Everspace and Lost Ember are 2 projects that I mentioned before already, were able to raise over 300,000 euros. But it was very hard work for them, and they are very good at that. So of course, there's other means in addition to Kickstarter. There's Fig.co, there's Indiegogo, Fundabeam. Now with the NFT opportunities, there is land sales you can do. You can sell NFTs via blockchain. So these opportunities are still there, but I would say it's not as easy as it used to be, and you need to be aware that it's a full-time job to raise this money. Looking at the advantages, of course, you are already sort of marketing your game when you're raising crowdfunding. You're building a community, you will have backers that could be advocates for your game. It's also market validation. So if you have a game on Kickstarter and you want to raise 300,000 and you have 5-10,000 backers, it shows that there's a need for a product that you're pitching out there. So so this is really also very positive thing for your marketing. And then I would say it's a very low cost to finance this compared to other means, because you basically you need to launch the game. You already sold it, but and the money you need to pay to these platforms is less than what you have to pay for publishers, for instance. The negative things I already mentioned. It's very time intensive. There's also a release pressure. You cannot just take the money and then decide whenever you want to launch the game. You have people waiting for that game. So I've seen some studios that came into problems because of that, because they basically spent too much time and had a very disappointing community after that. Some Kickstarter projects also made the whole crowdfunding become less popular because some games were never released. It can lead also to conflicts with publishers, because some publishers by principle don't or are not so happy to work with games that are already on crowdfunding platforms, because some of these games have already been sold. So you might have lower sales on day one if you already sold a large bunch of your games to your core community. And of course, there's a risk that you're not achieving your targets, and that can be critical if you do a Kickstarter campaign, for instance, and you're not launching your target, especially if it's not very ambitious. When you go out and talk with publishers, they will find out that or also investors, that there's been a Kickstarter campaign. And of course, if you haven't even been able to raise 30, 40, 50,000 euros for a game where you need 500,000, and there's only 50 backers, it's not a good advertising for selling your game. But still, it's a very good tool to raise money. I didn't touch here on early access and things like that, which also is a great opportunity. But again, it's been used a lot in the last years by a lot of companies, and also right now the recommendation is very often going into early access, for instance. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to achieve your goals. So you really need to manage your expectations with that and set realistic targets. Let me just go on to the next one. Okay, here we are. This brings me to the next one, which is public funding. Public funding is also, of course, an opportunity which is out there. I know that a lot of you come from different regions in Europe, and I can't cover all the different topics here right now. I just need to close this one. But in general, there's regional funding. In Germany, we have it in the different federal states. There's national support. It's a big topic in Germany right now because the funding for the next 2 years has just stopped. So it's important always also to keep an eye on what the current development is, of course, in terms of the budgets. But there are much more opportunities out there I would say, in Central Europe than there was a few years ago. So For a lot of the early companies, but also the more experienced ones, public funding is a great means of getting your project started. Something that's often overseen is technology programs like InnoFounder in Denmark, for instance. If you have a special technology in your game, you might apply, not only to gaming funds, but also to more technology-oriented funds. And very often these have quite more money. So this is something a lot of people often foresee. I know a studio that made a very artistic adventure game, and they received innovation money for a technique they developed to bring hand-drawn paintings into their game. So look at that in your game. Maybe you qualify for some of these. Creative Europe, of course, there's different incentives there. There is I think the normal program that everybody normally is applying for in the game or knows about in the gaming industry. But there's also other programs. So I can really recommend to take a closer look at the opportunities there. And if you're creative, you might find ways to maybe tip also into some of the other pools. Of course, there's also a lot of soft money incubators, accelerators out there that might provide you with maybe a little cash, but also giving you contacts to publishers, investors, and helping you on the way. And something that's, I would say, in the making right now is European co-productions, which also can be a way to finance your projects. I know the Spielfabrik accelerator is having some very cool incentives for that, and is helping to maybe combine different pools there are in Europe, so that projects can be funded across borders. So it's also something I would recommend to have an eye on. Of course, the advantage is that there's very little risk in this money here, because very often you don't even have to pay something back, but it's also, or sometimes it's only when your game makes a profit. So it's cheap money compared to other things. It will probably not have an effect on the other sources that you're using. There are some conflicts, for instance, between investors and publishers that you need to be aware of. But with public funding, I would say it's a very safe bet that there's not going to be some problems with other sources later on. And you can also use it for royalty negotiations. Also, again, that's something I often recommend to use when, because if you're bringing in the public funding, even if it's a match funding, and you're negotiating with an investor or a publisher, and you brought the money, it was your idea, you get it because you're based in Paris or in Belgium or in other countries. It's something you bring to the table, and it helps you to negotiate the deal. At least it's something I recommend to try. The negative thing is and that was confirmed to me also in the survey, is it takes a lot of time and administration to do reportings for a lot of these programs. So it's something you need to be aware of. But I think once you have the money, it's something you can deal with. It might be cumbersome, but there's ways to deal with that. But of course, the public funding is not unlimited. So very often this money brings you to a certain stage, but not further. So you need to be aware that fully funding your game on public funding is probably not the right tool for if you have a AA product with several million euros. And of course, not everybody is eligible for public fundings. Every program has some restrictions. Some might be linked to content, so you would need to consider that as well. But in generally, also, public funding is something I can really recommend. Then there's banking, bank financing and loans, and I think with all countries that I've been in touch with in Europe, everybody says it's difficult to get, it's challenging to get bank financing for your projects. So the general mandate is, or mantra is, I would say that banking is challenging to include into your finance program, especially because of the liabilities. If you personally liable for the loans that you're doing or your company, it can be a big risk on you. There's also a lot of cultural differences between the gaming and banking and finance industry. There are exceptions for that, of course, and I would say compared to 10 years ago, this is, or even 5 years ago, this is definitely changing. There's incentives for for making the banking and finance industry more open and understanding the gaming market more. And there's, except outside of loans, there's different tools that you can do. It's also supported a lot by the EU that is now giving securities for certain bank loans, but still there's a high risk of course associated to it, and of course you need to pay everything back, and even if the game is not performing. And I think that's the main thing. But of course you need a bank for your company, and you need some credits. And I think all startups I talk with, they were able to negotiate something. But the general recommendation is also, talk with the bank before you run into cash problems, because the more difficult the situation is, the more difficult it is to raise money, basically. And as I mentioned, there are some, different financial tools that are opening up. For instance, user acquisition is, if you have the right metrics, a way to raise financing. Also for that, rather than your production, if you come with a prototype. So on the pro side, it's relatively safe money. I mean, if you get money from a bank, there's not a huge risk that the bank might run out of cash or change their strategy suddenly, as you would have possibly with a publisher. You might be more independent in your creative choices, but again, you will have pressure to make money, to deliver. So I'll put a question mark on that. It's still relatively cheap, even if you have to pay interest. But compared to, for instance, the money you would need to pay with a publisher, it's if you're able to pay it back, it's might be less, but still it's the risk that counts, and that's also the negative thing. Everything needs to be paid back, and you might be liable with that, maybe even personally. And the interest costs, of course, is also something that can accumulate over the time and be a burden for you. And in the end, everything needs to be paid back. As I said, if you take public grants, you probably don't have to pay anything back. And also with a lot of publishing deals, if the game is not performing, the risk is mostly on the publisher's side and not on you. This brings us to the next group, which is investors. And investors was when I started doing this business development publishing Seek 5-6 years ago. There were not that many investors that were investing in games, and that has really been taking off in the last years. And you can see that on this slide here. And especially the last 2 years have been record-breaking years when it comes to investments, both from, of course, from traditional VCs companies, but also from more and more gaming funds, VC funds that have come up that I will explain a bit later. So the times for investments have been very good the last 3 years. At the moment, in Europe, the deals have gone a little bit down from 21 and 22. There's different reasons for that, but it's still easier to get money than it was 4 or 5 years ago. So what are the different investor types? And here it's also very, very important to understand what are these people looking for, so that you know how can you pitch your ideas. So as I mentioned, business angels is probably the first stage. Maybe business angels are people that have some money that they want to invest, their private money, into companies, and normally a lot of these are investing, maybe 30 to 100,000 euros. Very often you will have several of those that invest in your project. But of course you need to know them, you need to reach them, and you need to find them. And very often these business angels are not at Game Connection or at Gamescom or GDC. So it's a lot about finding these people also. Very often it's ex-founders from related industries, and they can often provide you also with a lot of know-how, because they've been there very often. They created their own companies, and know how to do that. Then there are strategic investors, and strategic investors are companies that invest in you because they have already an ongoing business and they want to develop that business. And you might have something that can help them with that. Maybe you can help them to release more games, or maybe you can help them to go into the free-to-play market or into the horror market, if you're in that segment. So they invest in you because they want to grow their own interests. So they're in there very often for the long term. Very often these are other gaming companies or media companies. As I said earlier, Dedelic, for instance, the German back then adventure publisher, was acquired by Bastei Lübbe back then, later by Nacon. That shows the interest there, and they very often acquire more. I mean, it can be from 100,000 euros to several million euros that they will go in. Very often, if these strategic investors invest in you, they also at some point will probably like to own the whole business. So that's also something you need to be aware of. They're not there for the fun. Probably they would like to to own the whole company at some point. And then there is VCs and institutional investors. Institutional investors are very often large banks, and then they invest a lot of money. So for gaming companies, mid-sized gaming companies, these are very often not relevant because the money you're asking for is probably too little for their portfolios. So, but venture capitalist VC funds are very relevant in this. And as I said, there are many more opportunities than there were a few years ago. But you need to know that these VC funds, they invest to make money. They have normally a portfolio of games or companies that can be between 10 to 30, 40 companies, and a lot of them will never make money. So your company needs to make money for them to, or needs to be potentially able to make money for them to for their model to run. So you would need to basically show some potential in your company that you could be that one company or one of those few companies that can make their fund work. Normally, they also invest higher than business angels. It can be down from 100,000 euros to also over 3 million. At some point, though, also the exit, they want to make money with their investments. So you also need to know they go into your company, they try to your company to grow, but eventually they want to get out. So therefore, the return on investment that they will get out of your company needs to be there. And that's something you need to consider when you pitch to publishers. To investors like that. Very often I see pitches also to investors that are maybe too realistic and don't really show the whole potential upside that you can have with your company. With these money from these different investor types, it's also relatively risk-free, I would say. You will get support for additional investments. All these three types, they eventually want to make money, and they make money if your game or if your company grows. So they will help you to find additional investments, and very often they all have the know-how and networks for that, especially if they come from the gaming industry. The negative side, of course, is you lose control in your company. You will need to give away shares. You're not the only one making decisions anymore. It can be a problem to get rid of investors if you're not happy with an investor, and I've seen that with a few companies that very early on took some investors into their company for quite some little money, and then ended up basically wanting to get rid of them because they weren't happy with them. They were blocking things. This is something you have to consider. Creative freedom I would say most companies would invest in you because they believe in you and your capability to make good games that can make money for them. But again, you know, there's limitations to that, especially if you might run up the money that they've invested with you. It's also time intensive. You know, you need to have board meetings, you do need to do reporting, and it's also something that you might not want to deal with. And of course, there's pressure to perform. I mean, these people don't invest for fun. They invest because they want to make money, and you need to deliver that. So you need to make up your mind if you want to play that game, of course. But the good thing is, you know, I've seen some companies that were, you know, tired, for instance, of having to chase finance money all the time, going from one publishing deal to another, and then becoming part of a larger group. You know, can be better for the company if you just want to make games, and you know, and you can make some good money by selling your company. And you're working with you know, a publisher or a group or investor that has some visions that, and some of these you know, companies are very good, cool to work with. So so it can be a sort of a way also to get a better life in addition to the money, but you need to be aware of the downsides, of course. Maybe just an overview of the different things, the different kinds of funds there are. I mentioned VCs. There's different gaming VCs here. I'm mentioning just the ones that I came to my mind now as the most prominent ones that you can mostly meet at the different conferences. LVP, Play Ventures, Sisu, Hyro Capital, Galaxy, Makers Fund are some of the most prominent ones out there. And you know, they can provide you with a network, with know-how. There's also synergies within their portfolio companies that you could use. But of course, you need to know that these are, even though a lot of them have a gaming background, they of course are very interested to get their money back with a good ROI in the end. And some exit at some point is what they have to look at, because they are venture funds, basically. Strategic investors also, there's a lot of different ones at the moment, and the possibilities are really there. I'm mentioning a few here. There is investors like Phoenix Games that focus on mobile games. There is Modern Times Group, which is a big media company that's invested a lot in esports, but also free-to-play companies like InnoGames that I showed you. This Amplifier from Embracer that is investing in startup companies. Nordisk Games that invests in quite mature companies already. So there's a whole lot of companies, and also publishers in generally, that are looking for filling their pipeline. As I mentioned before, the you know, the competition for developers is very strong right now. So having, of course, your internal studio to provide you with you know, with your games is much easier than finding games in the market all the time and working with new studios all the time. So as I mentioned, positive thing is it can provide you with security, with know-how. A lot of these companies are very experienced, have people that come from development, have a network of different people and companies, and can provide you with synergies within the portfolio as well. Of course, you're losing control. You're dependent on their strategy as well. And you need to be aware that some of these investors, of course, also are tied to publishers. And so it's a difference if you get bought by a publisher and you're fully owned by that, or if a publisher, you know, owns 20% of you. But if you're going out, you know, with a project and you're owned 20-30% by another publisher that for some reason don't want to publish your game, this can limit your opportunities to find a deal with another publisher. I've seen that happen, or at least getting those questions with some cases that I've been working with. And then there's what I would call special gaming investors. These are not necessarily VC funds, but these are funds that of course also want to make money, but they have a different approach than other of these typical VC funds. Maybe they're owned by very few people. Maybe they have a special mission, like for instance the Wings Fund that is investing in companies that are more diverse. Maybe it can be Amplifier, that is a part of the Invasor Group and sort of their early stage investment arms. Or it can be something like a Kowloon Knights that is investing mostly in projects and not in companies. They might have, not maybe the typical VC exit goal in the end, but again, it's also investments. They provide, mostly these people come also from the gaming industry, provide a lot of know-how, are quite flexible about their investment models. At least if you look at the different companies there are, you might find something that's very suitable for you. For instance, if you don't want to sell shares of your company and you are looking for project finance, maybe you're better off going to a company that focuses on project investments. And some of these companies, I would even call them semi-publishers, because some of them have business development people, marketing people on board that can take over some of the roles of the publishers. So the boundaries between publishers and investors are getting more blurry these days, I would say. What you need to know, maybe they're not always 100% compatible with other sources. As I mentioned before, it can be conflicts with other publishers. It might be difficult to get additional investors on board later on. And also some of these companies maybe have limited funds available, so that they might not be able to follow you up with some more additional rounds. So these were the different investor groups. Just want to mention here 3 things that always come up. I mean, there could be a full masterclass on the topic of investors, but I'm just trying to give a little bit on the surface and then dive into some important things. And I thought these 3 points were important. So it's basically understanding the different layers there are in investment. There's even pre-seed, there's Series A, Series B. That's something I often gets asked. Like a pre-seed is very often very early stage. People invest 30 to 50,000 euros maybe, make the companies grow, but seed can be up to 500,000 euros maybe per ticket size, as an investment is called, and that gets you started. Maybe that brings you to a prototype, something like that. And then there's the next round, which is normally as we call a Series A, and the Beta Dwarf that I was mentioning early here before has been going through these different stages, and they made they got an investment round where LVP invested $1.5 million in them, and then they grew, and later on made another series where they secured additional money. So we very often see that these different 3 different stages here, and of course it's something you should also include in your pitch, to say, okay, this is our Series A round, or this is our seed or pre-seed, so you know what is the next step basically for an investor. Very often, if you get some well-connected investors on board, they will help you finding additional investors for these rounds. People often also ask, what are investors looking for? And I know there was a very, I didn't see the pitch, but it was probably very good. I'm sure it was very good earlier today from Focus about how to pitch to publishers. So, I would say if you're pitching to publisher with a project, it's different than pitching to an investor for your company. Of course, the game is also important and key, but I see a lot of companies using the same pitch than they use for a publisher to when they speak with investors, and that's wrong, because investors look, and if you just look at the websites of some of the funds I mentioned earlier, they're looking for teams. They're looking for capable people, and normally you should include the 3 disciplines. Technically you should be very wise, you should be creative, and also be business people. If you do a free-to-play game, you need to know about the free-to-play business, monetization, user acquisition, and all that. So these three competences, I think, is something that there should be strongly represented in a company. So alone that is already I think something that should be emphasized more. Technology, have your special technology in your company. Scalability is something that's always coming up when you talk about investments. Can you take the money that you're making with your first game? Can you multiply that by adjusting your business model? You need to have that if you're speaking with VCs. Of course, IP is getting more and more important, especially if we're speaking now about cross media. We're speaking about metaverse. If you have something that can be developed, not just from one product, but into something that goes over years, even in other media, this is something the investors are looking for right now. And of course, also exit opportunities. If you just want to make games and use the money you make on your first game to make the next game, because you like making games, maybe that's nothing you should pitch to a VC, but maybe more to a strategic investor. And then the next point is valuation. And again, on valuation, we could have a long talk as well. But it's very important that if you start speaking with investors, and you, especially when you start taking an investor in, that you are aware of what impact it has on the valuation of your company. The valuation of the company is basically how much the company is worth. And there's different ways to define that, and it's quite complex. The general recommendation is that you should use several different methods to do that. Some of them based on your expected revenues, some of them based on what other companies are getting out there, some of it based on what your IP, what your technology is based on. But it's something you definitely should speak with experts about before you do it, because the risk is that that your company might, if you're getting some money in very early, that might be a lot of money for a little share. Because you need the money, your company can become worth a lot and on paper, and that can make it difficult for other investors to join you later. So be aware of that topic when you go out and you raise money. Here's even on VentureBeat, there was an article about whether it makes sense to evaluate gaming companies, but of course you need to do that, because you, as I said, it can be can hurt you later on, and of course you need to ask a price for your company. So but it's not easy, especially if you're a startup company. So that was everything about, or not everything, but what I had to say about investors. So let's talk about publishers. And if I mention publishers, just want to make clear here that there's different publishers. I'll go more deep into that later, but you have the classical publishers. I work for Ubisoft, that's a classical publishers, but you also have distributors, distribution platforms like Steam, like GOG, like the Epic Store, in Amazon now, and you have platforms that provide consoles where you distribute, and of course it's all blurry. Ubisoft has their Ubisoft.com store. Epic Games is founding games for their platforms, etc. But you need to be aware where these companies are coming from when you basically pitch to them. The big question, of course, is often being asked. Do you, in these days where you can by yourself put your game on the market, do you really need a publisher? We're talking about finance here, and I would say in most cases, of course, people look for a publisher these days because they need the money, and publisher is, I said, there were quite a few investment companies today, but if you look at the vast amount of publishers, and I have a list of around 300 publishers here, there's many more opportunities to find money with the publishers. But of course, there's other reasons as well. There's strategic reasons. There's a lot of things that publishers can do for you in terms of marketing, community, etc. So you of course not only need to be looking at the hard cash when you look when you're thinking about working with a publisher. So I mentioned there were platform holders mentioned before. There's the distributors, there's the AAA publishers. A lot of them have now also investing in smaller projects. It was quite difficult a few years ago to get funding from these, because unless you had a certain size of a studio. But for instance, Take-Two has private division. Ubisoft is funding smaller games right now. Square has a special indie program. EA has their EA Originals program. So these companies are looking for innovative indie games. There's the AA publishers that also, now that they have grown in size and budgets, still are looking for indie games. So a lot of them also have different labels where you can be, but it's not maybe the same size league than working with Ubisoft Activision, but you might also get more focus with a smaller publisher, especially with these boutique publishers, as they're called. I think Devolver was the first one a few years ago that were focusing on a certain kind of games and only had very few games in their portfolio. A few others have come up since then, and also maybe your game fits very well with one of them. So targeting a company specifically there is, of course, makes sense. It's very specialized publishers too, like Paradox, for instance, is a good example that's focusing on strategy games such as How the Wars as well. Annapurna, maybe more narrative games. Astrogun Simulations, Gameforge free to play, even though they also have an indie game label right now called IndieForge. So it's getting more blurry, but still you need to analyze the different publishers out there and find the ones you really think you can work with. Mobile games as well. It's a totally different beast speaking with mobile publishers than some of the others. Media groups is also something that people very often forget. Some of them might have labels. Netflix is very prominent now, but some of them are starting to look for games before you hear about it. So being out there, speaking with people, watching what these companies are doing can really make you fund your first projects. I worked with a Danish company that made some games for Adult Swim, which is the Nickelodeon label. And they had some web games on their site, and they liked the humor in the Danish company's games. So that was a good client of them. I think most developers were never aware that Adult Swim was actually publishing games. And then, of course, I mentioned the investment funds that I also see drifting towards publisher functions right now. So think about what you can offer them when you do your pitch, and also what you want from them, of course. In the end, it's about money. We're talking about money here today, and you need to be aware of on the financial side. If you need to make a decision whether you want to self-publish or you want to sell your game to a publisher, and there's different ways in between. Between work for hire, where the publisher finances the whole game, to 100% self-publishing, where you fund everything yourself. But you need to be aware. What do you get out of working with a publisher? Because you need to pay, and if the publisher pays the whole thing, it's good, but you will not get much of the financial upside. If you do a co-publishing deal, where you each pay 50%, ideally then you also split the revenues 50%. But that means that your game will need to sell the double than if you're self-publishing, if it needs to make financial sense to you. And I would always ask myself, if you have the choice, do I sell that many more copies of my game if I work with a publisher than if I wouldn't? And what can that specific publisher offer me? Some publishers, you might be able to say immediately, yes, they can do that. They have a huge community. They have the know-how. They know the market. And as I mentioned, there's other factors than the pure financial ones. But for a lot of publishers, or some publishers, I would say, can they really deliver you 50% more or 200% more sales on their games so that it makes sense for you? Something to really consider if you hopefully have the option to decide maybe between two deals, where one is offering more finance for more revenue, or for you getting less revenues compared to another deal, or you're in the lucky position where you can decide if you want to self-publish, because a lot of the publishing functions are available on the market right now. There's even agencies that do marketing for you and take a cut, maybe just 5%. So it's a complex decision making. Ideally, you will have some choices, and this is, I think, what it's all about, having as many choices to finance your company and game as possible. Whether you then get the money via royalties, minimum guarantees, milestone payments, or marketing support, in the end doesn't matter, but that you make the right decision for your right companies, and that you have the choices. So just to sum up on publishers, the pros, of course, they can help with marketing. They have done it all before, most publishers, so you might not run into some traps which there are out there. One example is a studio I worked with at some point. They had launched their game on early access and did not know that the visibility round you get on Steam is basically used up when you go early access. So it was very difficult for them to reach out to publishers later on, and if they'd worked with a publisher or known about that, they would not have made that mistake on their game. Of course, publishers also have networks to they might easier get you a deal with with Game Pass, for instance, but it's also possible to do it yourself. But also there can be a door opener and their brand can be very strong. If you're working with EA or with your Raw Fury or with Devolver, that helps you speak with other publishers for your next project, because they say, oh wow, you've worked with EA, whoa, that's we need to live up to that, so it can also help you on that front. But of course, you are dependent very much on the performance of your publisher. It's quite expensive money. I mentioned that you ideally will have a fair deal, but not all deals are fair. I would say I'm not a fan of these thinking that the publishers are bad people that will take all your money and try to rip you off. I think that's myths from maybe some of the old days. But of course you have to be careful. But of course you also have to make a good deal for you. And if everything gets recouped before you start getting some money recouped by the publisher, you might never see any money. So getting the right deal with the publisher is very important. But I've seen very fair deals in the last few years being proposed. I must say, I've also seen unfair deals, but I think there's everything out there. The important thing is to be asking around, looking around, not just accepting the first offer you get without asking people that have experience, which can be other developers, which can be people like me, or I'm sure also some of the local organizations that you work with are helping with that. Very often expectations are not fulfilled with studios I talk with when they work with a publisher afterwards, but often they also are. So I would say it's 50-50, and it's important to think also what you strategically want to get out of it. If the publisher fully funds your project, maybe that's fine. You're safe for 2-3 years. You can build some technology. You have some leverage to go out for your next project, which might help you to be more independent. It's very often also to make up your mind before that. Is this really the big hit that you're working on your first game, or is it something that helps you in your development as a studio? Something I also say is the royalties. I said it before. There's no guarantee you will get royalties in the end. Of course, if you have a potentially very good game, you've negotiated a good deal where you get, and I can always recommend that, try to get money from day one, even if it's just 10% or something like that from day one. You might, of course, get some money, but I would always look at funding for next projects without the royalties. Okay, that was it about publishers. I have some case studies here just to illustrate a little bit, the root of studios. The first one is Deep Rock Galactic, which you might know from a Danish studio called Ghost Ship Games. Ghost Ship was founded in, I think, 2017. So they started to work on the prototype backed by money from DFI, the Danish Film Institute, some of their own money they brought in, and by a public investment fund called Capnova. That basically got them to have a game that they could show to publishers, and they ended up working with Coffee Stain, which is based in Gothenburg, which is not too far from Copenhagen, actually, which again was a developer. You might know the Goat Simulator. You probably heard about Coffee Stain also. That came out of the game incubator in Skövde, which shows also a little bit, how a lot of these companies are evolving from the local funding and support which is there. But they were their publisher and invested in them, and brought the Deep Rock Galactic game up to a very successful early access launch. It very quickly had launched, sold over 500,000 copies on Steam and on Xbox. And eventually Embracer, who owned Coffee Stain already, bought the company. So it was one of the absolutely biggest exits that we had in Denmark. The second biggest so far as I know, after Cybo from Subway Surfers that was sold last year. So, and the game is sold over 3 million. It might even be 4 million now, 5 million. So it shows, again, the mix of, public money, investment money, publishing money, and early access money, executed very well. Another example from Berlin is Stratosphere Games. Stratosphere Games was also founded around that time, been out just for a few years, and they raised some money from some business angels, some private investors, developed a technology which was enabling them to do mobile free-to-play games. It was a very experienced teams, and they very quickly got interest from other publishers and also venture companies. And also they financed their growth with publishing deals, with public money and investors, and raised even more money last year, backed by One-Up Ventures and Riot Games, and are now over 50 people in the studio and grown very, very fast. So even the both the one product model that we've seen with Ghost Ship is using the mixed financing model, and also Stratosphere shows that in the free-to-play, maybe more commercial mobile space, similar routes are possible. So yeah, that already brings me to the end of my presentation. So some important things I'd like to give you on the way. I think networking is extremely important. It's very important to know the opportunities out there, and not just look at your local investors, look internationally, speak with international publishers, investors, opportunities for financing out in Europe. Proactivity. Most of the studios that have succeeded well, that I know, there was a reason why they succeeded, why they were able to raise that money. It's because they were constantly looking for new opportunities in the market. The market changes so quickly, the gaming market. You might be developing games for Snapchat, and that might be your sole business model, and suddenly they're not doing games anymore, and you need to go to console games, and if you're able to do that, then you can survive. But of course, it's good to have a focus, of course, but it's about being in the market and seeing what's happening, spreading your risk. Also, I'm not so much thinking about several projects and directions there, but more about the opportunities you have for financing. It's always better to to keep as many options open. It's very time incentive, I know, but before a deal is not signed, it doesn't happen basically. So you always need to have other options open. You will always need other sources also. Then in very rare cases there's only one source of finance for you, and that might also endanger you, because if you're working with a publisher and they suddenly change their strategy, and I've seen that happen, and it's still happening, and they suddenly exit your project, and you've geared up to 40-50 people, and need to find a new project within 6 months, because you get maybe 2 more milestones financed, and then it's over. It can be tricky. Seek external support in your search. You might have the contacts, but when it comes to the deal making, ask other people. I think the game industry in general is very good at sharing their know-how, events like this, or organizations that can help you. And something, going back to the survey we made in the beginning, there should be someone in the company looking at all the finance things, and that's not only looking for publishing money, but also keeping track of the budgets, making sure the cash flow is running. And I know it's tricky as a startup to have a full-time CFO, but ideally you have someone in your founder team that could do it, and that should focus on it, because it's nothing that should just be lying there for I don't know, everyone else to take care of. And in the end, I think with all these different opportunities out there in the market, it's also a question of of course what you can get, but also where you want to go as a person, as a company, because it might be better not going with a VC if you just want to make games. And maybe you're better off selling your company to a publisher, and that you trust, and you get employed. But maybe you're an entrepreneur that wants to grow the company, that wants to get this kick and ride, and work with with the finance world, and this is the way to go. But it's really up to you also to make up your mind. And with that said, I think it's a lot about managing opportunities and risks in this business, but this is up for you to decide, and hopefully I've been giving you some more opportunities and some warnings about the risks in this talk here. Before we go on to the Q&A, I just would like to recommend a few books here that have inspired me a lot. So first of all, or also that I would also recommend to read if you want to dive deeper into this. It's not all about finance, but I think in gaming a lot of these things are linked together. Here's The Publishing Challenge for Independent Video Game Developers, which is a very good book by Odile Limper, who is the former managing director of Ubisoft Germany, and there's a lot of things I've talked about today that are covered in there, but also in more depth about different things, also legal things and things like that. There's A Brand New World, which is a lot about pitching. It's from a marketing director of Starbucks and Nike. And if you want to understand, how you sell a product, how you sell a company, what to really define the vision of that, that helped me a lot in my work back then. Then there is one up from Jos van Dreunen, which is he's a professor at the New York University, and it's a very great compendium of how the games industry has been evolving over the last 30 years, and how companies have reacted to shifts and positioned themselves in the market. I can recommend that to everyone. And then there's Shoe Dog from Phil Knight, who founded Nike. It's a very entertaining book about how to grow a company and also a lot of the finance issues that he's had. Yeah, I had a great time reading it and recognized a lot of similarities from his experiences with what I've been seeing in the games industry. And then a blog called Elite Game Developers from Joachim Agrim, who's writing about these topics that I've covered today quite a lot. And it's really worth to read his newsletters and if you want to dive more deeper into this. And also, of course, you're welcome to reach out to me. If you have any questions, you can reach me on LinkedIn or send me an email to my private address. Always happy to have a coffee and discuss things with you. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think now we're going over to the question section.
Yes, thank you so much, Soren, for this presentation. There's a couple of questions from the participants, so I'll just read it to them, and you can answer. For everybody listening, if you have other question, it's the moment to ask them, and I might have a couple on my own. But let's start with Peter questions. What is your opinion on crowdfunding as a last resort? If you're not able to attract a publisher, should you consider Kickstarter, or is it a waste of time? Because if you can't find a publisher, it means that your game is not really worth it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to launch your game and you need finance for the game, you know, you need to take what's out there. Publishers are not always right, and finding a publisher depends also to some extent on luck, on timing, and if you have a product that haven't landed a deal, it doesn't mean that there's no market out there. Of course, if nobody answers your email and you only get very negative feedback, that can be an indication that there might not be a market out there. But the fact that you haven't signed a publisher is, to me, no sign that there maybe isn't a market out there for your game. It's a first validation, but it also depends on, you know, what publishers have you talked to. You know, is your game maybe very special interest? What kind of budget do you need? So I would answer this and say it's definitely considering it. I would analyze why you were not able to attract a publisher. And then make a decision from that, but be aware that it's hard work to do it. But on the other side, it might not cost you so much. If you need more on this, Peter, wherever you are, just see your name here. We can have a chat at the coffee and discuss more if you want.
Right. And the other question from someone anonymous is, why are business angels mostly not attending gaming-related events, in your opinion?
Honestly, some of them are. You know, there's always exceptions. I think business angels are very often not full-time professionals investors. You know, they are business angels are, you know, they have money. They have probably money in the bank that they want to invest. They might have also probably have some portfolio companies already. So they don't have the pressure to go out and be at all these events. I think a lot of the people at these events are there because of FOMO, fear of missing out. You know, if you are employed with an investment fund and you haven't been at Nordic Game and the other fund signs, you know, this awesome studio from Sweden that has just been pitching there, you might be losing that. And of course, you know, a fund has people to go out and be at all these events. A business angel is just one person. And honestly, if you've been at some of the games conferences, there's also better things in life than going around there. If you don't have the pressure and you need to go there, maybe one event a year is fine with you. So this is, I think, the reason was, of course, if you are a very very active business angels, and you absolutely want some money, then you would go. And business angels very often also get approached from other business angels with good opportunities. There are these lead business angels out there that maybe they go to these conferences, and if they see something, they share that in their network, and then the others jump on board. And they know, because they trust this guy, they do that. And being at a conference, you're getting a lot of requests from people, and that takes a lot of time. So this is my view on why they're not there. This is why you need to find them.
Right.
Yeah.
So another question from Peter. Follow-up question. Do you have some recommendation for publishers specialized in PC tower different genres? Peter has a list, but maybe I missed some of them.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a few publishers already that are into strategy games. I think that leans something to it. Maybe you can check some of those. I think specialized in that genre, I don't know.
There's one publisher. They're not specialized in that specific genre, but they do tower defenses. Goblins Publishing in France.
Who? Sorry.
Goblins Publishing.
Okay. Yeah. Good. So here's a good recommendation from Romain. I know that some of the new strategy publishers, like Hooded Horse, for instance, or Fire Squid. Maybe I would start looking there and see, and of course look at who published other tower defense games out there. But I could also see other indie publishers financing a tower defense game. If it's special and it has a certain edge, it could fit in with a company like Raw Fury, even though I don't know exactly what they're looking for right now. But
yeah, I'd say that working from my small experience in that area, that some publisher has very specific kind of editorial lines. So for instance, Raw Fury will probably publish any game as long as it has like an amazing artistic direction, and they don't care that much about the genre as long as they have that wow effect. So yeah, it depends. But yeah, I think Goblins Publishing in France, Fire Squid, also French by the way, are good ideas. And maybe also no, I think that's it. Yeah, from the top of my head, that's it.
Yeah. And then of course, what is the wow factor? That's the thing you need to find out about your game. How do you sell it to these publishers that would look at the wow factor in your game? But that's a whole nother topic, I think.
Yep.
How you're selling it.
Yeah, we should have a masterclass on that. A couple of questions from Celine. Hi, Celine. So first one is, any thoughts on European co-productions of game between studios, and especially how it relates to accessing various public funds in specific countries, and most notably the European Media Fund?
Yeah. I mean, co-production is a very broad term. Different companies bring different things to the table. I think there have been some good examples of games that have worked. I mean, AAA publishers such as Ubisoft are doing co-productions from the top across their studios. And we don't see that so often in indie games, but we see some things going, and I think it's an area that is definitely growing. I think it's a lot about developing trust between the parties and having complementary skills. So it's absolutely something I would recommend to pursue. Looking for a specific profile of companies that you would like to work with. I was in Strasbourg last year, where there was, from Spielfabrik, the European co-production market, and I know there's a lot of local organizations trying to make it easier to access public fundings across different, across different countries. So I'm very confident it's something that we'll see more and more of in the coming years.
And the other question from Celine is about advices for indie studios that don't want to have investors yet because they don't want to dilute the company at their stage, but are facing some cash flow issues between the projects.
Yeah.
Do you have any special advice, survival advice on this?
Yeah. My idea, I mean, the first that comes to mind is work for hire. There is at the moment, a high need for skilled, experienced producers, and there's different platforms and companies also out there that are helping to facilitate these things. So I think that could be, of course, there's things associated with it. You need to make sure that your clients don't take your people. You need to make sure that you're also, getting out of the work for hire hamster wheel at some point. But this to me would be the best idea now. Maybe, have work with an agency that can help you find these projects and see what you can offer.
Okay, thank you for that. So there is no question left. I have a couple myself. If you have any questions, it's the time to ask them, and then if not, we'll end it there. I want to come back on the presentation on I think there was a slide it was quite at the beginning where you were showing investment per platform over the past 10 years.
Yeah.
Would you mind going back to that slide?
Let me just see.
Easy for you. Yeah.
Am I still sharing here?
Yeah, you are. Yes, you are.
I think I need to close the chat here. Honestly, I'm not sure why. It's not that I'm hang on.
Yeah.
I got it. Yeah. Sorry, I have to do it this way here.
All right.
Because I don't want to jump out of the presentation.
Yeah, we are.
Here. Yeah.
So we see this big jump in 2021, which is not too surprising. What is the dark blue bar that seems to be growing like crazy?
That was mergers and acquisitions, and I think there were some very big deals that year. I mean, I think it was the Microsoft bought companies. There was the.
I think Bungie was bought by Sony, and was also Zynga being bought by Electronic. Take-Two.
Zynga was bought by that was recently that they were bought by Take-Two, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe that was more.
Yeah.
Recent.
No. I mean, there were some very large big deals there, but still, if you just look at the yellow and green one, it's been going up. Yeah.
Sure. All right. And the other question, and then we have another question from Peter. You mentioned crypto a couple of times just a few times as a possible strategy for finding finances, and I guess that would have worked until probably last year, but these days it seems to be harder. Would you still advise it, or maybe I misunderstood what you were saying?
Yeah. Generally, I've been skeptic about the whole crypto hype. It being sort of the solution to everything, but I think it will be there as a segment in the market to come. So my view on that is, if you have a game that is suitable for if you want to do games with NFTs. And you believe in it, and you make a game that's made for it, and you can raise the money. There's definitely going to be some market for it. So it's not that every game has to do NFTs and be in that space, but there will be companies that are in that space. Very interesting. I find games that are that have a certain blockchain component to it, but I'm not so 100% relying on it. But it's getting harder to get money that way. It was definitely not a recommendation for everyone to look that way. It was more to say, okay, this was a way to fund games very easily a few years ago. At the moment, it's tricky, it's hard because of everything that happened last year. But there's still companies that are raising money with blockchain and crypto. But it's not like, oh, we need some money. Let's put blockchain in front of our pitch, and then money will come. So that has changed. So it's a market that will be there. It's a special segment, but and it's definitely more harder to get money than it used to be.
All right. A couple last questions from Peter and Celine. First one, would you rather put the wow factor in the prototype, or is it better to stay realistic of what you can 99% reach? I'm not totally sure I understand. Is the wow factor a must to attract a publisher because nobody wants a mediocre but sure to release game? Should you aim a bit higher in your pitch to have a wow factor?
Let me just check.
The question, yeah, sorry.
No, I'm reading it right now. I don't know what you mean with wow factor. To me, the wow factor is the USP. You know, what's really special about your game. Because I mean, I think that is the most important thing. If you say the wow factor is we can deliver this in 12 months, or you know, we can do this game for 1 million, and you know it's never gonna find out, then I would say stay realistic, because eventually your partner will find out, and they will probably find out before they sign a deal with you. If it's about the wow factor of your game, you know, why is this a successful game? Why is this tower defense game the best tower defense game ever? You know, that is something I would push as much as I can in my pitch. Then it's up to you to decide, is it really realistic to achieve that? But that should be in the prototype as well. Maybe there's certain things that you can't show in the prototype because of lack of funding or production constraints. But if you mean the USP with the wow factor, that needs to be early on, because there's so many games being pitched, and it helps you to open the door. If I understood your question right.
Right. Sure. Maybe if the question wasn't understood in the right way, Peter, you can of course add some precision in the question. Question from Celine. In France, banks are very wary of helping with the loans based on game projects and IP. Celine personally had more success with the funds dedicated to helping the film industry, which is strange because games are it's a bigger industry than the film industry, and are also probably less risky. So the question is, any advice on how to reassure the banks beyond a strong business plan?
Okay, if you mean the banks in general, I think you know, showing the growth and everything that's behind the gaming industry. Of course, filming has been around much longer, and a lot of the structures, you know, the completion bonds and everything have been set in place over a long period, and there's much more public funding also to support if things go wrong. So I think it's taking a long time to come where film is today, and games are still early on. In fact, we have the same discussion in Denmark also. You know, the public fund for games is administered by the film institute, and people are saying, okay, why? Because gaming is getting much bigger than filming. I mean, and if you want to go the banking way, you know, I think you need to convince them, if you do it for your project and your company, that there's a solid business plan behind it, and it's not just a one-shot project that relies on if it's a hit or not. Yeah, and that's tough. I mean, it's because if it's this one project, it depends a lot on the performance of the game, and there's always a risk factor associated to it. I think in the film industry, there's more still more possibilities with MGs and established ways of financing things that banks might consider as as more secure. Because let's face it, as a game, you're not sure how much you're going to sell when the game is out, even though the gaming market is much bigger. But I think it's changing. I mean, there are banks out there. I don't know in France, but I see that banks are opening up. I would speak with some people that are maybe other studios that have worked with banks that successfully raised money from banks in France, because there must be some. Maybe Roman, maybe you know, but I'm sure there's been some finance for games in France.
Yeah. Well, at the top of my head, I cannot say anything, but yeah, I know that some banks are loaning to video games companies. Well, I guess it also helps when you already have some kind of back catalog of games that are still selling a little bit, and so you can show a constant stream of revenue, even if it's not very high. I think it does help a long way with the banks, and it's much harder when you're an indie company with no game released yet. I don't know what's your opinion on that, Soren. All right. Well, I think we're all out with the questions. So thank you all for coming. Thanks, Soren, again for this presentation and sharing this knowledge. And for all of those that are subscribed to the next week's masterclass, well, I guess we will see each other there.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure being here.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.